Greetings, scholars. This is Psychology 3340, Cognitive Growth and Development, and we're going to cover Chapter 5 on motivation. So I'll remove this weird little camera image of me in just a second. I just want you to know it's really me talking to you. So our objectives. What do we want to cover? What do we want to learn throughout this chapter? We're going to focus on four things. The first is to know what the nature of motivation is. So the definition of motivation and some of its key aspects. The second objective that we have is to understand the humanist view of motivation. It's one of my favorite theoretical perspectives. Number 3, what influences motivation? And that's for not only our students but also for ourselves. So we can use that in our college classrooms also. And then, of course, number 4, the same final objective that we have for all of our chapters is to apply. We want to apply motivation theory to the education system, either as teachers or as scholars ourselves. So let's get started. What is the nature of motivation? In other words, how can we define it? What does motivation actually mean? Motivation is defined as a state that energizes, directs, and sustains behavior. So it's initiation, getting going with something, and then the intensity and the persistence of that actual behavior. And this will vary based on many different situations. We see motivation reflected in the amount of personal investment in people's activities, and it's also or often exemplified by the amount of time that they spend on those activities and the amount of effort that they put into those activities. So I really want you to think of time and effort as key aspects of motivation. Motivation is really what gets people to do something and keeps them doing it. Now in the classroom, how do we define or measure motivation? We can look at it in terms of engagement. So are the students engaged in the class or in the material? Engagement is active, attentive, curious, and willing participants in the classroom environment. All children have motivation, guys. It could be related to school or not, but they're all motivated. Sometimes I hear teachers, they say things like, these kids, they're just not motivated, or parents who say that. Well, they are. They're just motivated not to participate or to be engaged. So we, of course, want to motivate them to be engaged, to participate. So keep that in mind. All children and adolescents are motivated in one form or another. One of the things that you're going to want to do as a teacher is to tap into that motivation for positive effects. If you're taking this course and thinking about yourself as a scholar rather than a teacher, you're going to want to think about what motivates you to do something. Consequently, what motivates you to not do something or to avoid it. So what we really want to cover to start off with, or to be clear about, is how motivation actually affects learning. So if we're teaching or if we're students, we want to promote learning. So we need to have motivation in the back of our minds. In this image, we have motivation, which leads to very important behaviors: goal-directed behavior, effort and energy, the initiation of activities, persistence with those activities, cognitive processing. Those are things that we've already covered. And reinforcing consequences. All of this is what's going to lead to enhanced performance. There are 2 different types of motivation. These are really important, and we're going to work with these and talk about these pretty extensively. I'm sure you've actually heard of them before. So the first one is intrinsic motivation. This is motivation from personal characteristics or factors that are inherent in the task. So if you have intrinsic motivation, you're going to engage in an activity that you enjoy because you enjoy it. So it's an end into itself, which basically means I'm doing this because I want to, because I like it, because there's something about me or about the task that is appealing and motivates me to participate. So intrinsic motivation. The opposite of this, or the second type of motivation, is going to be extrinsic motivation. This is motivation provoked by some kind of external consequence. So you would engage in the activity to receive some kind of a reward. And in this case, we're talking about a means to an end. So the only reason that I'm participating, the only reason I'm doing something, my motivation for doing it, is because there's something external to that situation that is rewarding me. So I'm only going to participate because if I do, I will receive a prize or a grade or praise from my teacher or student. It's not that the task is something that I enjoy myself, but rather the reward is the most important piece. So here we have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Now both of them do have value, and both of them can get children to learn, or even ourselves. We can use both of these in our day-to-day lives or in our courses. Okay? But really, what I'm going to try to convince you of is the need to promote intrinsic motivation with our students and ourselves over extrinsic motivation. Are you more intrinsically or more extrinsically motivated? Now remember, that does depend on situation, but we have a handy dandy questionnaire that can help you figure that out. The Motivated Strategies for Learning questionnaire was published in 1991 by some leading researchers in developmental educational psychology. I have a copy of this questionnaire, and I'd like you to take a minute to give it a go, to try it out and to answer the questions. So I'll make sure that this is posted alongside this lecture. And here is the actual survey, so the MSLQ for short. What you're going to do for each of the questions is think of a current classroom and teacher that you have. So it could be this class if you want, or it could be another class, a bio class or an education class or whatever. But think of one particular current classroom and current teacher and answer this survey based on that. Because remember, motivation varies by situation. So what you're going to do is answer on this 1 through 7 scale for each of these questions. So question 1, in a class like this, I prefer course material that really challenges me so I can learn new things. And you'll put your number answer down here. There's only 8 questions on this. After you've completed all 8, the scoring is here. So you'll score up questions 1 through 4, and you'll score up questions 5 through 6. And then you're just going to think about what those scores are indicating to you. Higher scores mean higher intrinsic goal orientation. Higher scores on the bottom one is a higher extrinsic goal orientation. This is just a little bit of self-reflection to help you think about and apply the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So go ahead, give it a go. Okay, so you probably needed a little bit more time than that, but you can always press pause. What did it tell you? Are you more intrinsically motivated or extrinsically? Maybe take it again thinking about a different class. I wonder if the results will be different. Let's get back to the nature of motivation. There are a couple more key aspects that we want to understand. The first is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy has to do with what activities we choose based on how successful we feel that we could be. So children, and adults for this matter, gravitate towards success. Success gives us an innate need or feeling of competency. We all want to feel that way, like we're good at something, like we can accomplish. We gravitate towards those things that we can or feel like we're able to do. This pushes us to do things we don't always want to do, like math homework, but it also explains why, as humans, we've been able to adapt to different habitats. So this innate need to feel competent, or self-efficacy itself, is an important piece of motivation. Again, it's the belief that one is capable of executing certain behaviors or reaching goals. This is important in the education field for both yourself as a teacher or a student. If you have high self-efficacy, you will seek out challenges. If you have low self-efficacy, you might avoid or make excuses for your work and your academics. There is yet another important aspect within the nature of motivation, and that's self-determination. Self-determination has to do with autonomy. Autonomy is doing things on our own. So we prefer activities for which we have some level of autonomy. And again, it's based on this innate need. So just like with self-efficacy and the innate need to feel like we can accomplish, with self-determination, we have an innate need for autonomy, for being able to do things on our own. When children have self-determination, they're going to be more motivated than when they do not have self-determination. So if you feel like you have some choice, some autonomy, some ability or control over the things that you do on your own and the direction of your life or your studies, this is going to increase motivation. So let's talk about it in this way. Here are two statements. Which one resonates with intrinsic motivation? I would like to learn about that. Or my teacher wants me to learn about that. So the top one, right? The top one has to do with that intrinsic motivation, a means in and of itself. And you can see here how self-determination is playing a role. It's autonomy in the decision as to what the person wants to do or how they want to behave. So I would like to learn about that. There's self-determination here. Instead of my teacher wants me to learn about that, lacking any choice or autonomy in the situation. Now, one of the sad things that we see, and your book does a great job explaining some of this, is that intrinsic motivation does decrease. It declines during the middle school years. So we have high intrinsic motivation early on in elementary school, and then we're going to see that slope downward. And there are some reasons. If you ask yourself, well, why? Why is this happening? The first is low self-efficacy. Students might not be as good as their peers, and now in middle school they're comparing themselves to their peers, and that could be in a particular academic domain. They start to lack this belief that they can be confident and successful, and this is going to decrease intrinsic motivation. Also, in the middle school years, emphasis is placed on grades, and grades is an extrinsic motivator, and it can undermine self-determination. Long-term goals start to become important. So this is when kids, they start to say things like, why do I need to know this? This is an external long-term goal rather than just a curiosity or intrinsic need to understand whatever material you're covering. So those long-term goals, oftentimes driven by teachers and parents, start to become more important. And then finally, there are some students who are just plain bored. They're bored of the delivery of information. They're bored of the structure. They're bored of the repetition of school. Maybe they're not being challenged. All of these things can decrease or contribute to the decrease of intrinsic motivation. I want you to try a few of these examples out. Okay, I'm going to give you a teaching strategy, and I'd like you to think, which of these are more likely to promote intrinsic motivation and why or why not? So this is just personal practice for you. So Mr. Welch tells his students, let's see which one of you can run fastest. Think about it for a second. Is this likely to promote intrinsic motivation? Why or why not? How about this one? In a unit on percussion, Mr. Wyatt lets his second graders experiment with several different percussion instruments. Again, likely or not likely to promote intrinsic motivation? What do you think? One more here. Mrs. Jaworski reminds her fourth graders how proud their parents will be if they bring home a good report card. Likely to promote intrinsic motivation? Why or why not? Jot down a few answers here for 1, 2, and 3. What do you think? How about number 1? Not likely to promote intrinsic motivation, right? The students are asked to compare themselves here with others instead of their own accomplishments. This is problematic. Number 2, I would say it is likely. One way that we can promote interest in school subject matter is to get the students actively involved. Let them try out new and different things. The third one here, not likely. The teacher is focusing students' attention on performance goals, looking good to other people, their parents, rather than on mastering the information. The focus is on the external rather than the internal consequences. All right, based on all of this, some application that's important. How can you promote intrinsic motivation? Pique curiosity and inquisitiveness. Give students a chance to discover something new in their environment, of course in a safe way. Discovery learning is a teaching technique that does this. Encourage questions about things that they are interested in. Never shut a question down. Always have them thinking, being curious, and being active. Number 2, you should give children the support that they need. This is especially true if it's a challenging task. The reason is because you need to build that self-efficacy. This is all Vygotsky right here. It's so great. It's all within the ZPD and scaffolding. But doing that in the appropriate way is going to build self-efficacy. They're going to see that they can succeed, that they can build competency here in whatever skill it is, especially if you break it down into small chunks. You're showing them here that they can be successful, and that is huge for motivation. A third way that you can promote intrinsic motivation is to provide opportunities for self-chosen activities and topics that they are interested in, and this gives them autonomy. What is that all about again? Autonomy and providing self-chosen activities. It's all self-determination, right? And you're going to want to build that to help promote intrinsic motivation. Another point here is genuine understanding should be emphasized rather than rote memorization of isolated facts. This tells them that the knowledge itself is valuable. You're taking time to teach learning strategies, promote working hard. It's not just about getting a grade or a score on an exam. It's about genuine and real understanding. One of our objectives in this chapter was to talk about the humanist approach to motivation. Humanists believe that motivation results from more than just external rewards and internal conceptions of one's ability and performance. So it emphasizes a higher order incentive to achieve and excel, and this all comes from within the person. So motivation results from the internal conceptions and the ability and the performance, and this need to achieve. So the approach in education would emphasize the whole student, or the emotional and social aspects of a student's life, in addition to the intellectual aspects that are the focus of most instruction. So it's not just behavior. An example of a humanist approach is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow believed that humans have an inborn need for self-actualization, or the idea of making the most of oneself. And this is what provides the motivation to achieve. This is something he said. I'm going to read you a quote. This tendency might be phrased as the desire to become more and more what one is, to become everything that one is capable of becoming. And this is Maslow's idea of self-actualization. Now, you could hear me talk all about Maslow's needs, but you're probably getting tired of my voice. He's got 7 individual needs, 2 categories, deficiency and growth, 4 in deficiency and 3 in growth. And then he talks a little bit about meta-motivation, and the definition is there. Here is his hierarchy of needs. Deficiency needs all the way up, and growth needs all the way up. Again, I could keep talking, but instead, why don't we listen to somebody else? So, this comes from about.com, which is not really that reputable of a source, but I previewed this whole video and I was really impressed. So I'm going to play this for you, and it's going to be a nice overview of the things that I just went over very quickly.
Hi, I'm Holly Hancock, here today with About.com to give you an overview of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're probably wondering, who's Abraham Maslow? Well, Maslow was a researcher and a pioneer in the field of psychology in the 50s who was seeking to synthesize a large amount of information about research related to human motivation. Ultimately, the fruits of his research were that he presented a hierarchy of needs categorized by two groups, deficiency needs and growth needs. The important thing about the hierarchy is that it's built on a foundation of basic needs that must be met and satisfied before higher levels of the needs are met. So, let's take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the bottom of the pyramid for Maslow's hierarchy of needs are our physiological needs, those needs that are required for us to sustain life. Breathing, sleep, water, food, and even sex are important for us because we want to perpetuate the species. The next step up on the pyramid are safety needs. Needs are met when individuals feel safe and secure with no threat of physical or emotional harm. Those areas and safety concerns are going to be living in a safe area, medical insurance, job security, financial reserves. Difficult, I know, in this economy, but those things that are essential for us to survive. In the middle of Maslow's pyramid, we begin to see our emotional needs of love and belonging. Once a person has satisfied the physiological needs like sleep and breathing, and safety, living in a safe area and knowing that you are secure from threat or harm of danger, higher needs become more important. Our need for friends, our sense of belonging, and our ability to give and receive love. These are all emotional needs that need to be met as we continue through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Next, it becomes important as autonomous human beings to experience a sense of esteem, to feel good about ourselves. We want to feel like we're important, that we matter. Those things that make us feel important and that we do matter on this earth are self-respect, achievement, attention, recognition, and our reputation. Finally, the apex of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. Self-actualization has been defined by self-help gurus and psychologists the world over. According to Maslow, self-actualization is the quest of reaching your full potential and being connected with the world. Some of those traits of being connected with the world and reaching self-actualization include truth, wisdom, justice, morality, and a lack of prejudice. Keep in mind, though, as you think about self-actualization, it's not an endpoint, it's not a destination, it's a journey, it's something we as humans are constantly trying to achieve. Finally, the benefits of understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, if you are in a social and behavioral science field, a psychologist, a counselor, a social worker, it's important to know where your clients are on the pyramid. You must understand where your patients are before you are able to address, assess, or even work with psychological issues. It doesn't make a lot of sense to delve into a patient's negative childhood experiences when they're struggling to keep a roof over their head and maintain steady employment. Understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a critical building block to understand other theories related to human growth and development.
Okay, so she talks here nicely about the application into psychology, but what about the application into education? And we're going to bridge that right now. So, how might Maslow's hierarchy of needs come into play in an economically diverse classroom? So I want you to think about this. You're at home, so you're not able to chat with your peers necessarily. But think about where a student in a low SES or in other challenging situations, where they might fall in Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how this would play a role in your classroom if you were teaching. I also want to point out, as you think about this, that some of the things that she described look a little bit different than what I have here. So, for example, love and belonging following or being labeled here within the deficiency needs, and aesthetic appreciation above. So, the aesthetic appreciation is the pursuit of order and beauty, reaching beyond the surface to underlying aesthetic qualities. So the labels here might be a little bit different than what she described, but it all is based on the same exact theory. And so you're going to see differences like that sometimes, not only in this, but also in Bloom's taxonomy, for example, or when people are talking about Piaget's stages. Think critically, think curiously, openly, and remember, these are theories, so they're not proven fact, and that's why you can see different interpretations, all based on one same theory. We're going to talk now about 3 things that affect motivation. That includes goals, knowledge, and metacognition. So we'll start off with goals and how goals influence motivation. Goals are reasons why people do what they do. It's something in a person, or something rather that a person would like to accomplish, mainly because of their personal desires. It's a cognitive process as we think about what we want to do and how to do it. And it's emotional because when we achieve them, we feel good, or if we don't achieve them, we feel bad. So it does direct our behavior. There are a few different types of goals. There are learning goals. We talk about these in terms of mastery. So acquiring knowledge and skills and understanding the value of knowledge. Understanding something is a learning goal. We can compare this to a performance goal. This is just to learn something or do something to look good or to receive favorable judgments, to avoid criticism. These performance goals, they tend to increase as we grow older. Another type of goals are proximal goals. This is short term. So I need to get an A in this class. That's a short-term goal. A distal goal, rather, is long-term. I want to graduate with a 3.75 GPA. So that's long-term over the whole college career. Distal goals are accomplished by completing many of the proximal goals. Another type of goal is academic. This is to be a successful student, and it's in contrast to a social goal, earning the approval of others. So maintaining or forming relationships with other people. These can stand in contrast to one another when we're looking at our students' motivation in the classroom. Are they there to learn, or are they there to socialize? Finally, one more type of goal that's important to understand is process versus product. So process is focusing on techniques or strategies, and products focus on outcomes. What effects do these goals have on motivation and learning? Well, higher level goals, or people that have those higher level goals, seek out more challenging tasks. Wait a minute, what do I mean about higher level? Let me go back a second. These ones in the front, learning, proximal, academic, process, higher level. Okay, performance, distal, social, product, lower level. So those higher level ones, those are the people that are going to seek out more challenging tasks. When we're concerned with performance goals, or the lower level ones, we tend to choose tasks that make us feel good or look good in front of other people. People with learning goals, or those higher level ones, see the teacher as a resource. They seek help. People with the performance goals, or those lower ones, they tend to see teachers as evaluators or judges. The goals themselves are going to affect people's attention. Students with performance goals have less in-depth processing. They're too concerned about looking good or being evaluated and not actually learning. And finally, proximal goals help students by providing more frequent and continual feedback. The feedback provides constant messages about progress. It's easier to keep goals that are proximal in mind, and it leads to success in distal goals. What else influences our motivation? So we've talked about goals. The second piece was knowledge. Knowing what you want and how to get it. We can talk here a little bit about means, ends, beliefs. The same basically as procedural knowledge, or knowing how to gain the knowledge or the information. For example, knowing how to make friends, knowing how to add fractions, knowing how to study. Strategies here are dependent on what the goals are. So if you have learning goals, you have more advanced strategies. If you have performance goals, you have less advanced strategies. So your knowledge, specifically your procedural knowledge, is going to influence your motivation. All right, one more piece here. What influences motivation in regard to metacognitive processes? We want to talk about monitoring progress, appraisal of actions, and appraisal of outcomes. So in monitoring progress, the first one here, what you need to do is coordinate multiple goals. So for example, if you are studying for your teacher licensure exam, that's the long-term goal, right? But you need to be checking in as you go, all along the way, with enough time for you to change your study skills if you need to. If you see it's not working towards that end desired result, you modify the behavior. It all starts, though, with monitoring the progress. If you can monitor your progress, monitor your goals, you're going to be more successful. So then comes the actual appraisal of your actions, and it involves a few different pieces. The first is evaluating actions that have been performed already. So you evaluate what's already been done. Did it work? Next, you can estimate actions in the future. So will this work? Is it going to help? And there are some beliefs here that are really, really important that play a role. The first are your personal standards. What is good enough for you? What standards do you have? Is this based on a rate of change or quality of change? What standard completes the good enough statement for you? What about control beliefs? Do you have control over the outcome or no control? This is your agency. And these equal different actions. So agency is the belief that you have control over certain outcomes, and that's going to change your motivation. Self-efficacy is important as well, and this varies based on the specific area of study. We've already talked a lot about self-efficacy. It's judgment about your own ability to be successful. These individual beliefs about ability to accomplish a task play an important role. How about ability beliefs? Number 4. A general sense of your skill in a particular area. So I can get an A versus I'm a pretty good student. This has some to do with self-concept or your overall feelings, academic or non-academic. There are a lot of influences within this. There are multidimensional beliefs. There's a lot of layers. Interest plays a role as well. So the quality of a person or an object or an interaction, and whether it shows itself in forms of prolonged, relatively effortless attention, feelings of pleasure, feelings of concentration. This affects your persistency in that task and your choices about whether you're going to complete, start, work on that task. We talk a lot about individual and situational interest. Individual is orientation or predisposition towards wanting to pay attention or learning something. Situational, on the other hand, are aspects of the situation that capture our attention. We talked a little bit about attention in information processing, so call on that information to help you here. We're almost there, guys. I know this is a lot of information I'm throwing at you, especially towards the end of this presentation. But we're talking about what influences motivation, and we're talking about metacognitive processes. We covered monitoring progress and appraisal of actions. And the final piece here is appraisal of outcomes, evaluating performance. We do this as it occurs and after. We have to think about our expectations. This is a forward-looking process, so the likelihood of something happening in the future. You'll consider your internal skill for that ability, as well as external factors. So maybe I'll think about how good I am at math, but I'll also think about the number of A's that math teacher usually gives out. When we have good expectations, it correlates with good results, and this can change the probability of having good intentions or motivation. We also need to think about causal attributions. This is backward looking. Okay, so it comes down to ability versus effort. Locus of control is important. So I don't want to really use the word fault, but whose fault is it when something bad might happen or something good? That's what locus of control is all about. So if I get a C on a test, is it because I didn't study well, I had ineffective study strategies, or is it because it was a bad test? So it's backwards looking, and we're thinking about ability and effort, these causal attributions that we make. We also have values, desirable and undesirable outcomes. And there's 4 different kind of ways that we think about this or talk about it. Attainment value. Is it important to do well on the task? Do I even care? That's attainment. The intrinsic value, do I enjoy it? Do I see value in it? Is it interesting to me? A utility value, the relationship between task and future goals. So is it going to help me? And cost value, how much effort is needed? Is it really worth it? Finally, the emotions are often based on the outcome. So joy, pride, and self-esteem if we have a positive outcome. Anxiety, guilt, and shame if we have a negative outcome. We have covered so much information, but of course, there are educational implications involved. So what are the things that you can do as a student or that you can do with your students if you're teaching around motivation development? We got to talk about goals. You need appropriate goals. I'm sure you've done all kinds of goal setting activities, workshops, that you've heard of this kind of stuff before. Some of the things that you can do that are pretty easy to implement in the classroom or with yourselves are to set short-term goals and set achievable goals. Provide knowledge to achieve those goals. So scaffold your lessons. Break it down into smaller pieces. And don't just teach the content, teach the skills needed to achieve that knowledge, and tell your students why it's working. So means and beliefs. We spent a lot of time just now talking about all those metacognitive skills. Why? What does it matter in the classroom? What can you do? Provide devices to help monitor students' progress. So charts, give them feedback. Create experiences where they're going to achieve success and that they can reflect on that success. Point out to students that they were the ones that controlled the success. It wasn't because it was an easy test. It was because they learned the material. They studied hard. They understood. If failure does occur, that is okay. It's part of learning. Point out that the errors are normal and how to build from there. And then number 4, keeping interests high. Introduce novel information that begs them for an explanation, that gets them really thinking and curious, and make that information personally valuable to them. Whew, that was a lot. Here are some questions for you. Do you know the nature of motivation, its definition, its key aspects, intrinsic, extrinsic, self-efficacy, self-determination? Do you know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Some of the things that influence motivation, like goals, knowledge, and metacognitive processes, and can you apply that to education? If you've gone through this summary list and you can check off yes, then you have mastered the information from this chapter.